Hume on the outside. Graham Hill also on the outside. It's going to be anybody's money to the checkered flag. And it's John Surtees who just wins.
So, about time, are we, John?
Yes, just about right time now.
I'll have to use your borrowed handkerchief again.
Put John Surtees back into his world of speed, and the years roll away. The grey hair is the only giveaway of the passage of time.
The head covers. So,
Yet he still looks the part, and his record stands to this day. The only man to win the World Drivers' Championship, Formula One racing cars, after taking the world title on two wheels 7 times. His last over a quarter of a century ago.
But then I always used a handkerchief, and a handkerchief is the only thing we ever used
Yes,
in the actual race days.
Yes, indeed, indeed.
Keep my original goggles company, at least.
And now, the master himself, the 1958 350 and 500 world champion, about to start another record-breaking season. Nearest the camera and the best position for Pitt's Bend is John Surtees. Hocking is first round the corner and thunders ahead up the straight.
But it's not long before MV Augusta's #1 claims the position expected of him in the late 50s.
The master has done it again. The day's racing is over, and John Surtees is the hero with a double in the first classic meeting of the year.
So this is Nostalgia Corner, moments when I can just turn the clock back. I suppose here's a little summary of my successful time in motorcycling, because this is a machine I first won with, at least 70% of the original machine, in 1951. It's a Vincent Grey Flash 500cc, and at that time I was at Vincent's with my apprenticeship, and then on to Norton, and I had to change to Norton because that was the only machine available which you could perhaps compete in international races with, and they agreed to sell me one at that sum, I think, of £280, £290, and as an 18-year-old, you know, it was a lot of money. And then Norton, of course, brought me considerable success on the English circuits, and finally I was able to beat Jeff Duke at Silverstone when he was on the Gilera, and this brought me to the attention of MV Agusta and a few other Italian firms, and so I passed on to MV Agusta, and that is a 500 engine, I think probably the only one outside the factory.
That's lovely. Let's have a look at the other side. Now, what's this one?
That was going to be my Jeff Duke beater. I had tried to beat him for 2 years with the Norton. This was in 53 and 54, and I couldn't do it. So instead I said, right, I'll build this engine, which I did while I was an apprentice at Vincent's, put it in a Norton frame, and I'll try and do it that way. But what stopped it was that Nortons came along and said, join the team and use a Norton. And so I used a Norton, and fortunately I was able to beat Jeff with that. And the next stage, of course, was the MV Agusta, and then, of course, MV Agusta through to the next room, which is 4 wheels.
Just leave it on
4 wheels.
Oh, now that is magnificent.
Oh, that's my 1964 flat 12 1.5 litre Ferrari, which I only used on about 2 occasions in that year, but it came to its very best actually at the very end of 65. But it's my chassis, I know that for sure, not only the number, because when they built the first monocoque, and I was basically the person sort of behind insisting we had a monocoque chassis instead of all the tubes and things, and it ended up too small for my thighs. I've got rather wide thigh bones, and so I went along and rather inexpertly, I think, used the old rubber hammer to sort of bash the sides in. You know, there's my original ding marks on either side. They're in the chassis to make me fit.
So they are, in fact, the marks of the champion.
They are the marks.
Championship year.
That's correct, yes.
So much of your life has been involved with speed. And yet now here you are with a passion, it seems to me, for doing up older buildings.
You know, when I came up the drive here and I saw this house for the first time, I had to try and save it. You know, it had been so neglected and was in such a terrible condition. But at the same time, I think houses have such a special character and they can communicate with you. And it sort of virtually said to me, you know, save me. And I just fell in love.
And how old is it?
1477.
It must cost a fortune to try and return it to that century.
Well, I'll say that it isn't without some sacrifice.
Surtees' own Elizabethan manor on the border of Kent and Surrey.
But
So
what makes the world go round?
What was this originally?
This was the old kitchen. And they only stopped using this when they built the other part in the early 17th century. And we've just been restoring the spit, and I managed to find a spit jack up there so that when we have our housewarming or reopening, then we can have a drink and perhaps a roast nicely going before the fire. You must have an invite.
Thank you very much. I shall accept.
Yes.
Let's then, John, talk about the career which enabled you to indulge this hobby of yours. I take it that your interest in things mechanical was from your father?
Yes. At a very early age, or just after the war actually, when he sort of brought his 596 Norton out of hibernation again and started to prepare for his racing. He was British sidecar champion just before the war, incidentally. And Dad took me down to Brands Hatch when he was going to test around the grass track. And I was let loose on the cinder part round the outside of the track in those days, where the spectators used to go. And this is a single speed, no gears or anything, and that's what I did. I rode this old Blackburn round and round, and I suppose what I was about 11 then.
If you weren't worried, and your father wasn't, surely your mother was.
Well, Mother had grown up, and I think the earliest picture of me is with me in my mother's arms down at Brands Hatch in the paddock. And she had been, in fact, a passenger in my father's sidecar in some events before the war. And when we went to race meetings, if there was any parts required, she used to get in the motorcycle and sidecar and off she'd speed. And it was very much a team affair. Once I caught the bug and I got involved with Father on working on the motorcycles, I was constantly involved. After the Blackburn, I got a little 250, an Excelsior Jap, which in fact I competed in my first race on. And it was at a place called Eaton Bray, just outside of Luton, I think it was. And it was a pouring wet day, and I remember I think I must have set a record that day because I fell off on every single corner and I ended up in a frightful state, but the bug had sort of bitten a little deeper still, and Dad then said, that bike's too big for you. So we went to an old rider who was very famous, Harold Daniels, who'd won the TT in '39, and bought a little Tiger 70 Triumph for £12. And that was given to me to turn into a racer.
2 years later, at the age of 17, he won his first race at Brands Hatch, and then saw the hero, Jeff Duke, from slightly closer range when finishing second to him at Thruxton. As his apprenticeship with Vincent's progressed, so the bikes improved. At 19, he had his first Norton and seemed ready to make the breakthrough.
I had a chance to go to the Isle of Man in 1953, having bought the Norton for the first time at the end of '52. And I went to the Isle of Man, 37.5 miles long circuit, totally sort of scared of the whole thing. And I went out, and then Joe Craig, Joe Craig, he was a god of motorcycling, as such, as chief of Nortons, came along and said, give you a works bike. Well, I didn't understand, how this could be, but still, he offered me a works bike. But I'd committed myself to ride a little 125. I won't say the make of it. I asked if I could be released from riding this 125, and the person concerned said no. I got out in practice, and I went round as far as about a third of the circuit, Ballough Bridge, took off, came down the other side. It got in a wobble along the straight and the forks broke. I went over the top, and there is the result, a broken scaphoid. And so I got on the boat and went home and lost my first works ride, and Joe Craig was so upset he wouldn't give me another ride for 2 more years.
The John Surtees of today can afford to smile. As the veteran who still races on the circuits of Europe, he knows how well he used those 2 years of his youth. In that time, he won 80 of the 200 races he entered, and developed the style which took him to the top, to the Norton team, and to a time long cherished.
The most memorable event for me was Silverstone, 1955. It was the last race that Joe Craig was to be the manager or involved in the racing scene, which is historic in itself. And there was this tough Irishman at the end of the race where I'd managed to beat Jeff Duke for the first time with a Norton, with tears running down his cheeks. And that will always stay in my memory as one of the most satisfying things that ever happened in my career, because he gave me a lot in the year I was with him.
Going to Italy, John, I mean, were there any doubts in your mind? I mean, wasn't it at that stage was slightly non-British, go ride for a foreign machine?
Very much so. I had tried to stay with Nortons, and in fact, after that event, I went and saw Gilbert Smith of Nortons, who was the managing director. And I said, I believe that I could win the championship with a Norton in 1956. And he said, why do you believe that, Surtees? I said, well, you've got new circuits in Sweden, you've got the new Dutch Grand Prix circuit, and the way the Norton handles compared with the Gilera, I think I can just get the edge. And if we have 1 or 2 wet races, this will make all the difference. So he said, well, obviously I must put it before the board, and perhaps you care to come back in, say, a week's time. So I duly went back in a week's time. He said, well, Surtees, he said, yes, he said, we have considered it, and we think, in fact, that you have something. We think that you could possibly achieve this, but we're sorry, we can't do it. He said, do you realize that if you won the championship, you would earn more than a director of this company? And that, I think, gives an insight as to why the British industry died. So, Bill Webster from Crewe, who was an avid MV fan and a great friend of the late Les Graham, who'd got killed in 1953 with the MV Augusta in the Isle of Man, said, John, the Count wants to see you. So I go to Monza, they wheel out this fire engine, as it referred to, the big 4-cylinder, and I jump on it. The first thing, of course, is this beautiful sound of the 4-cylinder engine. And I do a few laps, and I start to think, yes, I could like this. And I got down to a better time than the machine had done there before. And so I said, I've seen enough. Have you seen enough? Yes. So I'm taken back to Casino Costa, the home of MV Augusta, and led into this office with trophies and things, aeronautical, not motorcycling, because they hadn't won that many races. And we talk, and they say, we think you'd like you to ride our machines for us. Are you interested? So I said, yes. Right, we will pay you so much.
Roughly how much, can I ask?